At a wedding overflowing with music, laughter, and shimmering gowns, one woman sat alone, her wheelchair pushed back into the corner as though she didn't belong. She was a powerful CEO, yet tonight her strength seemed invisible to everyone around her. Guests whispered. Some looked with pity, others with dismissal as though her chair defined her worth. But just as her heart sank deeper into the quiet, a single father, dressed modestly, standing at the edge of the celebration, walked toward her with unexpected courage. What he asked her next stunned everyone at the wedding, and changed both of their lives forever. The wedding was held in a grand hall, adorned with chandeliers that shimmered like captured stars. Guests filled the space with chatter and laughter, their silk gowns brushing against polished marble floors, their champagne glasses clinking in harmony. Yet amid the beauty and celebration, there was an air of quiet exclusion. At the edge of the room sat Eleanor, a respected CEO known for her sharp mind, resilience, and the empire she had built. Her wheelchair, however, was the first thing people noticed, overshadowing her achievements, her strength, and her humanity. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of love, but for her, it had become another reminder of how society often measured worth by appearances. She was placed at a table apart, where no one lingered long. Eleanor's gaze swept across the hall. She watched couples twirl across the dance floor, watched friends reconnect with embraces, and listened as laughter swelled around her, yet never included her. Some avoided eye contact, others offered awkward smiles before turning away. Beneath her calm exterior, she felt the familiar sting of isolation. Among the crowd was David, a single father working tirelessly to provide for his young daughter. Unlike the others, he wasn't wealthy or adorned in designer suits. He had been invited by a cousin, and truthfully, he felt like an outsider too. Standing near the back, David noticed Eleanor's quiet struggle. He saw not a wheelchair, but a woman forgotten in a room full of joy. That simple recognition was the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. As the music swelled and the couples glided across the dance floor, Eleanor tried to mask the ache in her chest. She busied herself by adjusting the napkin on her lap, tracing the rim of her glass, pretending she didn't notice the glances, or the lack thereof. She had been through boardrooms filled with dismissive men, through negotiations where her voice was overlooked until it was echoed by someone else. Yet here, at a wedding of all places, the loneliness cut deeper. Weddings were supposed to remind people of love's universality, yet she sat as proof that society often excluded those who didn't fit its perfect picture. David, leaning against the far wall, could see the way the crowd's joy seemed to swallow her whole, leaving her untouched by its warmth. He recognized that look, the same one he had seen in the mirror when his friends drifted away after his wife's death, when he walked into parent-teacher conferences alone, when people treated him like a man missing a piece of himself. He didn't know her story, but he didn't need to. He knew isolation when he saw it. The announcements began. Dinner service, toasts, the usual routines. Yet every cheer and every clink of glasses seemed to underline Eleanor's solitude. At one point, a group of bridesmaids passed her table, their hushed laughter slicing through her like glass. She pretended not to hear, but the words lingered. Why is she even here? Who would ask her to dance? The sting of those words carried her back to childhood memories of exclusion. Classmates who never invited her to play. Teachers who praised her intellect but pitied her body. Boardroom whispers that her position was a publicity stunt, rather than the result of brilliance. Even here, surrounded by supposed celebration, the same old wound was reopened. David wrestled with hesitation. His suit was borrowed, his shoes scuffed, and his confidence had long ago been buried beneath the weight of single fatherhood. Who was he to approach her? She was a CEO, a woman of stature, yet as he watched her straighten her shoulders and lift her chin, masking her pain with dignity, he realized courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about acting despite fear. He thought of his daughter, who often asked why people treated her father differently, why they looked at him with pity when he struggled. What lesson would he be teaching her if he let this moment pass? With a deep breath, David stepped away from the wall. Every step toward Eleanor's table felt heavier, as if he carried not only his own doubts but hers too. The crowd's laughter blurred and the music dimmed in his ears. All he could see was the woman sitting alone, a flicker of strength and sorrow in her eyes. When he finally reached her side, He didn't offer pity. He didn't offer charity. Instead, he offered something far more powerful: recognition. The night was about to change forever. Eleanor glanced up, surprised to see David standing beside her. For a heartbeat, the noise of the wedding hushed in her ears as though the entire room was holding its breath. She braced herself for another polite smile, another empty gesture meant to soften her solitude. But then David leaned down slightly, his voice steady yet warm, and asked the words no one else dared. "Will you be my date tonight?" The room seemed to freeze. A few heads turned. Some laughed under their breath, assuming it was a joke, a momentary act of pity. But Eleanor caught the sincerity in his eyes. There was no mockery, no calculation, only honesty. Her throat tightened. For years, she had fought to be seen for her brilliance rather than her chair, for her leadership rather than her limitations. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Not as a symbol, not as a burden, but as a woman. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The crowd's silence deepened, and whispers rippled like fire through the room. A janitor and a CEO, a single dad and a woman in a wheelchair, two people who to the world didn't belong together. But as David gently guided her to the dance floor, the tension cracked like a storm breaking. The music swelled again. Yet this time, it wasn't the band that commanded the moment. It was them. Eleanor's chair spun gracefully under David's careful touch, her laughter soft but real, breaking through the veil of loneliness that had weighed on her for so long. Some people stared in shock. Some sneered. But others, the ones who had once whispered cruelly, now found themselves quiet, uncomfortable, confronted with their own prejudice. And in that silence, something shifted. Because when David looked at Eleanor, he didn't see a chair. He didn't see titles or wealth. He saw the courage it took for her to show up in a world that often pushed her aside. And as her smile blossomed under the soft lights of the wedding hall, everyone watching knew they were witnessing something greater than pity or romance. They were witnessing dignity, courage, and the kind of connection that breaks barriers. The dance ended, but the echo of it lingered far longer than the music. Eleanor sat still for a moment, her chest rising and falling as she processed what had just happened. All her life she had been defined by others, by her wheelchair, her position as a CEO, or the unspoken assumption that someone like her should stay on the sidelines. Yet tonight, in front of a room filled with eyes that had doubted her, she had claimed something far greater: her humanity. David, too, felt the shift. He hadn't expected anything beyond a simple act of kindness. Yet as he wheeled Eleanor back to her table, he noticed how the atmosphere in the hall had changed. Some guests looked down, ashamed of their laughter. Others avoided eye contact, perhaps realizing for the first time how cruel indifference could be. And a few smiled softly, touched by the courage of two people who had dared to break through invisible walls. Later that evening, Eleanor left the wedding hall with a quiet sense of peace. Not because she had been saved or pitied, but because she had been respected. For once someone hadn't looked past her or through her, but directly at her. That gesture, simple yet profound, carried more weight than the wealth or accolades she had gathered across her career. For David, the night reminded him of something he had nearly forgotten. Dignity costs nothing, yet it is worth everything. He had spent years struggling as a single father, cleaning up after others, rarely noticed except when people wanted to laugh at his expense. But tonight he had shown not just Eleanor, but everyone watching, that kindness is power. That courage doesn't come from status or money. It comes from daring to act when no one else will. Weeks later, when people spoke of that wedding, they didn't mention the decorations, the food, or even the vows exchanged. They spoke of a dance. A janitor and a CEO. A man and a woman who, for a fleeting moment, made the world stop and re-examine itself. And perhaps the most powerful part of the story wasn't the dance itself, but the silence that followed it. Silence that forced people to reflect on their own biases, their own blind spots, their own hearts. Because in the end, it was never about pity or romance. It was about recognition. Recognition that every soul longs to be seen, respected, and valued, no matter their circumstances. So the next time you're tempted to laugh, to dismiss, or to look away, remember this: one act of courage can dismantle prejudice. One gesture of kindness can ripple across countless lives. The question is, When the moment comes, will you be the one brave enough to step forward?